Thanks for downloading this episode of On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter at ontherecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com.
Welcome to part 2 of our 2-part series on mobile search strategy. If you missed episode 1, you might want to download that one as well. We spoke about mobile search optimization strategy, Google Places, and optimizing businesses without an official physical location for mobile search. And we're going to actually be advancing that conversation in this episode. Mobile search is all about social and it's all about local. But what about businesses with multiple locations or brands sold by resellers at locations that aren't their own? How should marketers approach this type of a scenario? And what about the user interface? You know, it's one thing to lead a horse to water. It's another thing to actually get him to drink. And we know by now that the user experience on a mobile device is very different than the one on the desktop. But what's the best way for marketers to ensure that a positive mobile experience ensues so that the customer can actually find them and then they actually stick around and convert? With us again for part 2 of our 2-part series on mobile search strategy is Rich Devine of ZAAZ, a design, optimization, and analytics agency acquired by WPP in 2006. His presentation at South by Southwest was one of the best ones I attended, and I'm pleased to have him back with me to talk more about mobile search. Rich, welcome back.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate the opportunity.
Now, we spoke in the last episode a bit about the strategy for Ford and optimizing them for search. But what if you had, an organization where there was no single location and you didn't have a relationship at Google where they could just sort of import all that data for you? How would you approach that sort of a strategy, like maybe for a Starbucks, or what if it was a franchise like a Domino's? How would you make that happen?
Number one is take a look at both your internal assets and resources in terms of people, technology, and platforms. And when you're thinking about local, I would first start to think about the people that you have in different geographic locations. So Starbucks, Domino's, those are good examples where you have either independent franchise owners or people that kind of roll up under your organization at different kind of regional levels or segments. And so the trick there for me is to find ways to empower them. That's what we tried to do initially at Ford. Culturally, I think it was a little bit of a challenge, and so we found a way to kind of have a massive shotgun spread that was effective for us. But at the end of the day, even for Ford, their ability to be successful and to be targeted and specific at a regional level is really governed by and predicated on how well kind of regional stakeholders accept the responsibility to focus on local strategy. So it's maybe not a very sexy strategy, but that's where I'd start first is trying to empower and encourage local resources to take ownership of their local marketing. Again, we spoke last time on the importance of local listings. Again, by themselves, not really that sexy. Traditionally, the kind of the domain of small businesses, but there's no rule that says that big brands or medium brands or different types of brands outside of food and typical services can't use those listings. Again, Localese is a great resource. Yellow Book is still fantastic in my mind. Universal Business Listings, those are kind of the top 3 for me, that if you can focus on them in addition to the main search providers, Yahoo, Bing, and Google, that will take you a long way. And then in terms of really diving down at a regional level, when you think about keyword strategy, the concept of geo-modified terms and geo-modified keyword strategy has typically been kind of a paid search approach in terms of how you structure campaigns and ad groups. we've kind of borrowed that logic when thinking about SEO. In terms of how we develop and organize content. And so that's more and more important, especially when you consider, as we spoke about previously, the fact that for Google, every search is local, or at least they try to make it local if it makes sense for that individual query. And so if you can introduce and offer geo-modified content, which corresponds to geo-modified keywords that are targeted for that content, that will take you a long way in terms of performance, both in terms of visibility and in terms of actual conversion from that content that becomes visible.
So, Rich, let me ask you, are there any generalizations you'd be willing to make with respect to how mobile search strategy differs if it's a considered purchase versus an impulse purchase?
You're just going to find more impulse purchase behavior on a mobile device, and I think that's going to be largely true across industries, across verticals, across strategies. That said, while that's generally true, it's not necessarily true that you won't find consideration and kind of preference search behavior on a mobile device. That still exists, especially when you consider that I don't necessarily distinguish mobile device between tablet device. A lot of the time that's kind of the same experience, or that there's kind of a middle layer there. And for some devices, and the device makers between iPad and some of the new devices that are rolling out, they're still tending to serve a lot of mobile content depending on how your site is structured. And so as those become kind of more and more available and in the consumer's hands, the mobile experience will not just, again, be impulse-based. There will still be kind of a consideration layer there that's important to mobile as well.
What about B2B versus B2C? Because it's rare that you have a meeting nowadays where everyone in the meeting doesn't check their mobile device at least 2 or 3 times. So the mobile device is becoming used by professionals throughout the course of the day. Do you see a role for mobile search strategy for B2B, and if so, what might that be?
Yeah, certainly. A couple ways to approach that. When the first layer, again, this is true whether we're talking mobile strategy or regular site strategy, and that's to understand the value of a success event or a conversion or whatever you want to call it. And for B2B, there's generally a lower volume, and there's a lower volume both in terms of kind of behaviors and audience. But there's kind of an inverse relationship between volume and value. For many businesses, the value of a successful event or behavior is very, very high. And so when we look at strategy, we have to really understand those values and have a really strong kind of analytics-based either model or understanding of conversion values and successful behaviors, and then let that dictate kind of what strategies come first. And so that's really important when you're considering mobile. So there isn't one kind of answer to that question. The way to answer that question is, again, take a look at your data, take a look at the value of the behaviors. And we dive into our analytics data first and just try to get a good understanding of, okay, well, how much behavior, how much of our visits is coming through mobile, or do we believe is attempted to be viewed through mobile? Is there different behaviors specific to our business that need to be mobile based, or for many B2B organizations, it's generally the same. There isn't necessarily always kind of a local angle to be played, especially for B2B, that distinguishes the experience between desktop and mobile. that. Go ahead.
Rich, my grandfather, Morton Schwartzman, may he rest in peace, was a manufacturer of colored aquarium gravel. I'm going somewhere with this, okay? So humor me. He was a child of the Depression, and he built a business where he basically bought gravel, dyed it, and sold it in bags to pet stores for the bottom of the fish tank. And you think about that and you think, wow, what a great idea. He must have been rich. And he was. He did very well. But he was limited in his ability to grow because it's so heavy. You can't really ship it. So the truth is, he did start a little business and was kind of the first one to do it. But he was never really able to be competitive in other states because it was always cheaper for competitors to just open up regionally and undercut on price. So I wonder, when you think about B2Bs and, selecting a raw material supplier, be it plastic resin or gravel or any heavy raw material where shipping and the cost of shipping and accessibility is an issue, do you think perhaps mobile search could wind up becoming sort of the key by which those who source these types of materials, particularly if they're heavy and tough to ship, will start to find these types of suppliers? I was teaching a social media boot camp in Chicago a couple months ago, and I had in the class a woman who was the head of the Quarry Association. And at the time, it didn't dawn on me that maybe mobile would be the answer for an organization like that. But do you think there's any am I onto something, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think this is actually a great kind of area where the lines between mobile and local blur. So it may be that actually local is the big play here, because you're having people in any specific kind of geographic area looking for a very niche product. And if you can kind of own visibility by location, you're going to be really successful, as opposed to limiting your optimization strategy to the product keyword itself. So if he's kind of over focusing or narrowing his focus on colored aquarium gravel, or whatever combinations of relatable keywords there is for that very niche product, that's good. But it becomes his success is there's just much greater potential if he considers local as kind of the next level strategy on top of his kind of.
Well, what I'm wondering is weight an issue? I mean, if you are a supplier of a material that's heavy and expensive to ship, would that be a good reason to focus on mobile search? I mean, do you think sophisticated purchasers and purchasing agents are going to start to use their mobile device to find the suppliers closest to them? Oh,
yeah, no, certainly. I see where you're going. And so then it becomes a matter of findability. This is interesting. Thinking of not necessarily what's available now, but this is where we kind of go back to that concept of not just thinking about search engine optimization, but search optimization and kind of optimization of the discovery experience. And so, the mobile device actually becomes the search engine in that case.
Is there a service you can use to grab like an embed code or some sort of JavaScript that you could just easily publish to an HTML web page to give it geo-RSS information?
Yeah. So a great resource to just kind of look up is what we're calling micro-formatting. And H cards as an example of microformatting. What this allows you to do is it basically embed on a site kind of the concept of a V card or a virtual business card, but it's often called an H card, and allows you to provide basically a kind of a variable global footer address, location by location. So this allows you to provide separate pages for multiple locations and you basically kind of configure that in the sitemap that you submit to search engines. So it's really, really useful, again, to kind of provide geographic differentiation that's visible to the search engines, and that what you're essentially doing is providing kind of unique, kind of geo-modified content without having to go through a lot of expensive production page by page. So yeah, micro-formatting, great option to kind of accomplish geo-segmentation for web pages.
So I'm on microformats.org right now, and I'm looking at the HCard 1.0 page. And, it's not that technical, but it's certainly more technical than a lot of our listeners are going to have the patience for. Is there a service where you put in a zip code, it spits out a little, bit of microformat code that you can put in the footer, or is there any sort of, layman's service?
Yeah, that's a good question. We enjoy the flexibility of being able to kind of customize that on our own. If that's out there, it's a great idea. If it's not, I might consider getting to that first, Eric, so you can make a little bit of money off of it.
10%. All I want is 10%. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's I don't. You could probably spit that out in a day if you had a smart cookie to just simply code that for you. But they might be out there.
Now, you showed an infographic titled "Multiple Location Optimization Strategies" by eLiance, which basically illustrated different mobile local search strategies. And one of them was optimizing different pages of the same site for different locations. Now, there are numerous examples of when that might be useful for listeners of this podcast. For example, if you were putting out press releases and each press release applied to a different market, if you had case studies and each case study was relevant in a given market, in public relations and marketing as well, there's always this sort of attempt to localize news and make it more applicable to a given market. So I guess microformats and HCards is how you would pull that off?
Yeah, so there's two steps there. So that in terms of the code that resides on your site, microformats, it's a fairly simple and easy way to manage that. But just having that alone isn't necessarily going to solve all your problems. You really need to take advantage of kind of search engine protocol and be able to talk directly to search engines. And so maybe that's the kind of the answer to your original question, Eric. It's something as simple as using things like Google's webmaster tools. And so for whether you're a large organization or just a small site, Google will offer you just a basic snippet of code that you can embed on your site. You can then log in to their kind of webmaster tools dashboard, and then there's a number of things that you can do there. One of those is being able to kind of dictate how that information is distributed location or region by region via a submitted sitemap. And that's available from Google. Google has their webmaster tools kind of solution. Bing has theirs as well. And again, it's at that point, it's about how you kind of structure your sitemap in combination with something like microformatting and HCards.
When we return, what it takes to drive conversions on a mobile device. Stay with us.
This January 2011, Paul Gillen and Eric Schwartzman bring you the first book devoted exclusively to B2B social media communications. Packed with business-to-business case studies and applied knowledge, Social Marketing to the Business Customer is the most comprehensive collection of B2B social media marketing guidance ever assembled.
B2B markets are driven by value and relationships. That's very different from B2C markets. This book's a hands-on guide. It walks business people step by step through the process of using social media to find and engage business customers, to ultimately drive more revenue.
Social Marketing to the Business Customer is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and Borders, or buy it at our show blog at ontherecordpodcast.com. Also available for iPad and Kindle.
Now, what about the mobile user interface? How should it be different so that people have a positive experience?
Great question. So this is one of the kind of my favorite quotes, and again, true whether you're talking about traditional site design or mobile design, and that's it's a quote by Edward Tufte, who's kind of recognized widely as an inspiration for those that are involved in information design. And he basically said that you need to really look at the content itself as the interface, the information as the interface, and not kind of get overwhelmed or too involved in all of the kind of computer administration debris and the functionality as the interface. And so that's really true for mobile, where you have to recognize that there are pieces of content, there are certain kind of types of information that are just simply more important to a user on a mobile device than on your traditional site. And you know, a lot of people that design for mobile accept that and they get that, and they offer something that maybe has a little bit more simplicity, both in terms of accessibility and navigation. But that's also really, really true for search optimization in a mobile kind of environment and experience. And so when you're talking about, and this is true both for paid search or even just paid media in general, but especially for SEO. SEO is really, at the end of the day, it's all about content. The more quality content you have, the more visibility you'll have, the more success from search and referrals you'll have. And so we spoke during our last session about the idea of a one-to-one kind of relationship between your regular site content and your mobile content, and that's in reality not going to be possible. Your mobile site will more than likely have less content, but you have to understand what content is important, not just to the user, but to search engines in terms of what they're indexing, again, from that single search engine index, and what's going to return in results, and what's going to be important when someone performs a search, whether that search is on a stationary desktop device or on a mobile device. And then that next step is making sure that there's a kind of a seamless experience. And so the example that we've discussed, again, is just really important, where if they have a result that they see in their Safari browser on an iPhone, and they click on that result, you want to make sure that that's available to them either on their mobile site, or if that content doesn't exist on your mobile site, to be able to render your main site content on the mobile device, as opposed to just flipping them back to your mobile homepage.
Well, let's take a step back for a second before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, and answer. Tell me, how do you convert a website to a mobile site? What's the best way to do that?
Good question. That's probably an hour-long answer that I'd love to get into. I think that, again, the first step there really is your content strategy, and that begins actually with analytics as far as I'm concerned. If you're able to dive in and kind of understand, depending on what kind of site assets are existing today, to understand when users are on a mobile device, what content is important to them. When they're on a stationary device, what content is important to them. And so you can take a look at behavioral analytics, something like data you'll get from like a Google Analytics suite or an Omniture.
Right. I mean, let's say like we know what our top pages are. You know, we know where our top content is. We got our analytics, and you know, we're not complete boneheads, just semi boneheads, and we want a mobile site. We don't have one. What do we do?
Sure. Help me understand, Eric. Are you talking about optimization or the actual design process?
First, let's talk about just the actual design process because what can you if you don't have a site, you can't even optimize it.
Sure. I don't know that I'm the best expert on the design process.
Well, you're better than me, man. I promise you. Okay.
All right. Well, let me think about this, Eric. You may have to edit this.
I mean, what are the basic options, right? I mean, do you run it through the website mobile converter machine and it's done, or because the problem, it seems to me, like the big wild card is going to be keeping it in sync, because if you're doing a good job with online marketing, you know, you're publishing new content all the time. You're constantly refreshing it.
Yeah.
So obviously you're going to want that content to be available through mobile as well, even if they're not the top pages, because who knows what's going to spike, man. And you might publish an article that, you know, you have no idea that it's going to get retweeted by somebody with a lot of followers, and then you want it to be accessible to mobile devices. I mean, it seems to me some sort of strategy that would allow you to keep the two in sync would be the way to go.
So the question to kind of where to begin when you're trying to design specifically for mobile, it's in many ways the same question that we have when, you know, a few years ago we were trying to understand how to design a site that had a lot of kind of rich interactive attributes to it, but was essentially invisible to search engines. Okay, so follow me here. What some kind of businesses started doing is they started, you know, developing separate sites completely. They'd have kind of their website for humans, which is kind of really rich and visceral and had a lot of flash. And then they were smart enough to understand that content was essentially invisible to search engines, so they built a separate site, and they kind of smell when a search engine robot would come around and crawl, and they'd say, okay, you're a search engine, you go look at this other site, and they would kind of cram that site full of keywords and optimized content. Google then said, no, you can't do that. What humans see has to essentially be the same version as what we see. And if you try to fool us, you're going to get in trouble. Now, that presents an opportunity for us to look at how to develop for mobile as well. At the end of the day, it's actually much easier to manage. It's much more feasible to manage a rich, visceral kind of vivid experience and have a text version of the site visible to search engines when you're basically operating from the same body of content. And as far as Google's concerned, they're fine with that. As long as it's essentially the same content, they don't care what it looks like to the user. And then again, that's the same for mobile devices. If you can find a solution that allows you to populate the same content rendered differently for a stationary device, but then, you know, unique for a mobile device, that's where you want to go, because then you're syncing and you know, just the time it takes to manage is decreased, and it's just an easier process. And so the way to do that is to really focus on your content management system. And so there's a lot of solutions out there. Some of them are better than others. WordPress, if you're maybe a smaller site owner, it really at the end of the day, WordPress for me is a content management system, and depending on the types of themes you may use for WordPress or Drupal or whatever type of CMS you may be using, they'll give you basically some automated options for rendering your content on a mobile device that's fairly clean and allows for some flexibility where you can say, okay, this is the experience, this is the content that I want to feature for a mobile device. But at the end of the day, again, it's really all about your CMS as opposed to trying to develop two completely different sites.
So, what about redirects? You had mentioned in your presentation at South by Southwest, the way that you structure your redirects really matters because it affects the expectation of the mobile searcher.
Yeah. So again, depending on how you kind of build that mobile site, and let's first talk about kind of what we call that site. So you got to think about whether you're gonna, do an M dot kind of nomenclature for your website, or maybe you'll say Eric Schwartzman WAC mobile, or maybe you're on a WAP site. However you determine to kind of structure your domain is important first, because what Google is going to do is that if they see something visible, they're going to try to kind of crawl and index it. And so as a search marketer, you have to think about the risk of duplicate content. If Google sees content that's very similar on kind of different domain addresses, then they're going to slap your wrist.
Can I push back on that?
Sure.
So often, if I say take a press release that's been distributed by a big company, if you search the headline of the press release, you'll see the press release on all sorts of news sites. You'll see it on the company's site. And, they always say Google doesn't index duplicate content. But when you search a press release, you see it indexed, if it's a big public company, you could see it indexed hundreds of places.
Yeah. When Google's doing that, though, they're not just looking at the text. For them, duplicate content really is pretty duplicate, meaning the page and the attributes on that page in terms of code and text are very, very similar. And so when they're taking basically a syndicated piece of content, as far as Google is concerned, it's all unique because it's just the text or the article itself that is similar. The other attributes of that site are unique.
So what if, for example, here, let me give you another example.
Sure.
I take this podcast, okay? I have a podcast blog and I have a blog where I don't do podcasts. If I were to cross-post the show notes for this podcast from the podcast site and the show blog, would that be seen as duplicate content?
It depends on what those pages look like. If the content, the footer, the header is all generally similar and the same, yeah, you'd probably be at risk. But if kind of the wrapper that exists around that content is unique enough, and really you think about your titles and descriptions. So if your title for one is unique than the other, you're going to be okay. And so I think you've got your blog version, and that's kind of positioned uniquely, and it even says, look, this is Eric Schwartzman's blog, and then you've got another page that this is Eric Schwartzman's podcast, and then again some of the other information is unique in terms of attributes and code. You're going to be okay.
But you're saying in a mobile site, if it's the same content, that could hurt you.
It could hurt you, and oftentimes, again, if we're thinking that we want to kind of want to be smart and we want to have a consistent experience for some of our content pieces, we're going to perhaps look at sharing, titles and descriptions, and that becomes a risk. So what we're saying is talk to the search engines. That's kind of the key here. In this case, Google's okay because as far as they're concerned, a mobile version and a regular version, that's kind of two versions of the same thing. And as long as you position it in such a way that you're not trying to scam the search engine by introducing more content just for the sake of having more pages indexed, you're going to be okay. So what we do is we recommend what's called user agent detection. It's a very simple piece of script that's embedded server side for your site that just simply tells the search engine that, hey, I know this looks like similar content, but I want you to prioritize my site content when you crawl as opposed to prioritizing this mobile version. Your mobile version will still appear to humans when they're on a mobile device, but Google, in that single index, they're going to favor your regular site content as a way of kind of avoiding that duplicate content scenario. And so user agent detection becomes a really important tool when you're thinking about kind of mapping content. So in the presentation, we talked about kind of the concept of one-to-one mapping. In theory, it sounds great, but it's not always feasible and it's not always appropriate. So, in addition to having user agent detection, you can really use that to your advantage by thinking about what pages you have on your mobile site and what pages you don't. And so you can kind of use that selectively by saying, okay, for product one on my page, I have a corresponding version of that site for my mobile device. I'm going to tell the search engine to make sure that my main site is indexed, but when someone comes and they're on a mobile device and I can detect that, I want them to see that page on my mobile site.
So just so I understand this,
sure.
Just to understand, you're saying as a function of the actual code on the page that's stored on the server, this user agent detection is what would allow the search engine to decide which page to serve based on the source requesting the information.
Yeah, not necessarily which page to serve. This is simply we're talking about which page to index and put in their search index.
Right. Because so I guess the other would be mobile device detection.
Yeah.
Rather than user agent detection.
Right. And that would be a separate kind of piece. And again, if you're using a good strong CMS, that's going to be offered as a pretty kind of WYSIWYG feature.
Example of a good CMS that offers that.
Again, I think WordPress is great for kind of smaller businesses.
So WordPress has all this stuff.
Yeah.
WordPress has all this stuff built in already through plugins.
Yeah, and themes. Again, WordPress is a good foundation. What I would look at, and some kind of great kind of Google searches for your listeners to think about is not just WordPress, but WordPress themes, or mobile WordPress themes, or SEO WordPress themes. There's some just really kind of strong, and again, these are almost like skins that are built around the WordPress system. They're really strong, not just for SEO, but for mobile as well. And then I've seen some recently that are really excellent for all three when you consider regular site, mobile, and tablet, specifically iPad.
Any that you've looked at that you remember by name that you could mention?
Yeah. So I would take a look. There's some that just got released. Themedy.com is a great one. I'd take a look at that. Thesis is probably the most well known. If you were to just kind of do a Google search for WordPress thesis or thesis WordPress themes. I really like Thesis because it's kind of recognized for being highly search optimized.
Cool. And what about analytics? I mean, how would your analytics or monitoring or evaluation approach for mobile metrics be different than the type of measurements you'd be looking at on a static site?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first thing to recognize is that the metrics are different, and to not fall in the trap of viewing mobile metrics the same way that we view traditional site metrics, to the point where it probably makes a really good idea to segment between your site metrics and your mobile metrics. And then the question, we go back to really understanding site goals and digital goals. I think that we spend. I love analytics. I was born in analytics, but a lot of the time we fall in the trap of making analytics turn into info porn, where about 80% of it is cool and nice to know, but really has no kind of actionable value. And so for your business, I would really take a look first at business goals. What are you actually trying to accomplish with your website? What is the role of your mobile site, or what is the role of mobile device for your site or a tablet? And once you really kind of understand those unique goals by device, then you can start kind of honing in on what your metrics should be. So you'd start out with very simple metrics that correspond to adoption, and I kind of have a three-step process here. So adoption metrics might be just simply mobile site visits as opposed to regular site visits. Kind of media source metrics. So on my mobile site, where are those visits coming from? Are they coming from ads? Are they coming from search engines? Are they coming from social sources? That's really interesting when you compare source metrics from mobile to source metrics from your traditional site.
So how would you do that? Because I'm in Google Analytics right now, and I see under mobile the options are mobile devices, mobile carriers, and then there's a user-defined option and custom variables option.
Yeah, again, depending, and I don't want to speak generally because it really does depend on how you configure and what analytics package you have. But you should be able to take a look at referral metrics, and whether it's through a custom method by device, and so. There's different ways to do that. You could actually kind of say, look, here's my one easy way to do it is just to have not necessarily different accounts, but different sites. Say this is my m.ericschwartzman.com site, and configure it that way. So all of the data you look at is specific to that kind of unique domain. For me, that's one of the easier ways to do it. Some of the other, again, engagement metrics are important to look at. Frequency, time on site, depth, and pathing. The trick here is to not necessarily equate those metrics between regular site and mobile site. Time spent on site it may be a shorter time spent on site for a mobile device may actually be really successful. Whereas for a stationary device, you might want to see a longer time spent on site because they're more likely to kind of mess around and dink and duck between content. Whereas on a mobile device, they're really looking for something right then and there. So it's important not to equate metrics between mobile and regular site.
Final question, Rich.
Sure.
How do you monitor? First of all, what's a micro conversion, and how do you monetize it?
Yeah, one of my favorite questions. So, a micro conversion, often called soft conversions, or we tend to call them unique site behaviors. And so, the concept here is that if you kind of picture all of the traffic that you get to your site, whether that's a mobile site or your regular site, oftentimes we over-focus on a conversion. And we say, okay, at the end of the day, that's what I want. I want a conversion. I want someone to buy my product. And no matter who you are, your conversion rate is going to be pretty low when compared to all of the activity that you have on your site. So let's say that your conversion rate is 2%. Are we then saying that 98% of my visits were unsuccessful? No, there's a lot of success that's happening, even if they don't convert. They may be engaging with your brand. They may convert offline. They may convert later on down the line. They may actually call a phone number. There's just a ton of other behaviors that may not have as much value as a conversion, but they represent some amount of value. And so a micro conversion is simply a way to look at those other behaviors and assign value to them. And that just becomes really, really important when we start evaluating the success of any digital behavior, whether it's the success of a site itself or a mobile site, or it's evaluating the success of media that we buy to send to those sites, or evaluating the success of earned media from things like search engine optimization. So what we've done for our clients is we essentially build what we call monetization models that draw upon different data sources, so analytics data. We take a look at survey data. We take a look at financial data, and we kind of assemble that data to have a pretty directional idea of what the value of each of those micro conversions is. So let's say that I'm selling cars. I'm Toyota, and I don't actually sell cars online, but I have a number of different behaviors that contribute towards an eventual sell. So I may have build and price a vehicle. I may have find a dealer. I may have submit a dealer quote. I may have 3 or 4 other behaviors that are all really important, but have different values associated with them. So build and price may, at the end of the day, be worth $25. Find a dealer may be worth $10. Submit a dealer quote may be worth $75. Kind of getting outside of just that traditional conversion and valuing other site behaviors or micro conversions just becomes really, really important, so you can get a fuller picture of what's actually going on with your site, and then data becomes actionable. You're not focusing again on that 2%. You're focusing on the 100% of activity that goes on because you're looking at micro conversions.
So, Rich, talk to us about ZAAZ for those who don't want the brain damage and they just want you guys to deal with it. How does it work? Tell us about your services.
Sure. Well, the first trick is when you call us up, don't ask for me because I'll talk your ear off and we'll give you brain damage. But ZAAZ is, we're traditionally known as a full-service interactive agency, and we've been doing really strong world-class web design for 11, 12 years. And then early on in kind of our our life cycle, we started to get into web analytics. And so our mantra has always been trying to find and live at that intersection between data and logic. So we can design something that's really killer looking. It's a great kind of human experience, but if it doesn't perform, what value is it? We may win some creative awards, but that's not necessarily the best value for our clients. So we try to balance creativity and data to find and build websites that perform. And then in addition to that, we're full service, so we offer media services, whether that's search engine marketing, search engine optimization, display media. We have analytics services and optimization services, which are really important, where we actually test versions of your site or your media campaigns. We run A/B tests, multivariate tests. And then we also have social media services that kind of overlay everything that we do. So we look at social as something that kind of spans across site design, media, everything that we do. So that's an important service that we offer as well.
Well, Rich, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about mobile search strategy.
Eric, appreciate the opportunity to talk your ear off. Let's do it again. This
has been part 2 of a 2-part series on mobile search strategy with Rich Devine of ZAAZ. On the show notes, I'll have his Twitter handle and a copy of his deck that he presented at South by Southwest. If you missed the first episode on mobile search strategy, definitely download that one as well. Also, upcoming episodes you may be interested in: when to tweet, when to Facebook with Dan Zarella, and a second episode with Dan on when to blog and when to email market, based on his groundbreaking research on the most effective times to reach out via social media. And we also have a special episode with Robin Daniels of Salesforce Chatter about the rise of private social networks, and a special with Rachel Happ, community management special. So don't miss those. As always, you can get those at www.ontherecordpodcast.com. Rich, talk to you later.
Thanks, Eric.
You've been listening to On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter at ontherecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com. On the Record Online is hosted by Eric Schwartzman, an independent online communications consultant whose clients include the U.S. Department of State, the United States Marine Corps, the U.S. Embassy of Greece, the Government of Singapore, Johnson & Johnson, Toyota, Southern California Edison, the Environmental Defense Fund, and dozens of small to medium-sized organizations. For information about engaging Eric Schwartzman as a speaker, social media trainer, or digital strategist, visit www.ericschwartzman.com or send email to eric@ericschwartzman.com.